Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday, as well as upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you are subscribed. And with that being said, you guys, happy Halloweek. We are now in episode 2 of our Halloweek series. If you're just tuning in and are wondering what Halloweek is, that is when we are posting back-to-back episodes every single day for the 4 days leading up to Halloween. And this is episode 2. As you guys can tell by the title of today's episode, today we are talking about the murder of Teresa Halbach. Many of you may be familiar with this case as it gained nationwide attention back in 2015 when a series called Making a Murderer hit Netflix. I remember when this series dropped, everyone was talking about it, everyone had opinions, and now I am here today to get yours. This case truly has divided the public for reasons you will soon understand, so with that being said, let's jump right on into it today. Teresa Halbach was born on March 22nd, 1980 in Kaukauna, Wisconsin to her parents Richard and Karen. Now, Richard passed away when he was 31 years old in 1988, making Teresa only 8 years old at the time of his death. Karen, her mom, went on to marry a man named Thomas Sikorsky, and together they had 4 more children. They had 2 boys, Tim and Mike, and then 2 girls, Katie and Kelly, and this made Teresa the oldest sibling. Teresa and her siblings were raised on a dairy farm in a town called Hilbert, Wisconsin, that had a population of less than 1,100 people. Hilbert was known for hosting different events such as the Cheese Derby Picnic and the Cheesehead Run. Teresa went to Hilbert High School and graduated in 1998, and then she went on to attend college at the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay and graduated summa cum laude with a photography degree in 2002. During her time at Green Bay, she also worked for the college newspaper. She was a part of the business marketing group for Green Bay. Teresa also had a high school and college boyfriend who she dated for 5 years. However, the two naturally just drifted apart, but remained friends after their breakup. Now, after college, Teresa still lived on the property that her parents owned. She still lived on the dairy farm. She just lived next door to them in a farmhouse that her parents, again, owned. It was on their property, but it was easier for Teresa to stay on that property with them. Not only did it make more sense financially for Teresa to stay on the dairy farm, but she also loved being on the same property as her family because it gave her the opportunity to spend a lot of time with them. She had a tradition where every single Sunday she would walk over to her family's house and she would spend time with her younger sisters, and the 3 of them would watch their favorite TV show together. During the week, she was also known to pop into her parents' house a few times a week, several times, just to check in and say hi. Now, she also had a roommate living with her in her farmhouse, so in the house that was separate from her parents, and that roommate's name was Scott, and Scott and Teresa lived as roommates for about 8 to 9 months leading up to her death. Scott said that Teresa was always in good spirits. She was also, again, incredibly close with her family. Scott also said that there was never any romantic connection between the two of them. They were just roommates that luckily turned into friends. Now, as far as Teresa's career went, Teresa had gone on to actually open her own photography studio called Photography by Teresa, and that was in 2005. She specialized in children's photography, but she also did weddings and graduations. Photography was something that she was really passionate about, and that is where she wanted her career to expand. This was her dream. But while Teresa's dream was still in the making, she still needed to find another job that could support her financially and pay off some of her bills. Her photography business was still up and running, and in the meantime, she needed something else to support her financially, and that is where she got a job working for an auto trader magazine as a photographer. Now, for this auto trade business, Teresa was hired as a photographer in October of 2004. Her job was to go to different job sites with the seller of the vehicle that was looking to be sold, and she would take pictures of the car to go into this magazine and be published. So essentially, if anyone had a car or a vehicle that they were looking to sell, they would call the Auto Trader magazine to have someone come out and take pictures of the car, and that person would be Teresa. So Teresa had these two jobs. She had her own photography studio, and then she worked for the Auto Trader magazine. And when Teresa was not working, she also coached her little sister's volleyball team. It was something that she loved to do. And again, it was another opportunity for her to spend time and to bond with her family. Teresa absolutely loved the idea of becoming a mother to her own kids one day. It was a lifelong dream of hers. And when she wasn't spending time with her family, some of the other things that Teresa loved to do was spend time with her friends. She loved singing and doing karaoke. She also loved traveling and had been to so many different places throughout the world. And anyone who knew Teresa only had the best things to say about her. They always said that she exuded a very happy, bubbly, and positive energy. She had a zest for life, and she was always known to be the life of the party. So now that you have a little bit more of an understanding on Teresa and her background, her family, and her interests, her hobbies, and her career, I want to jump to the day prior to Teresa's disappearance, which was October 30th of 2005. This was a Sunday, and on this particular day, it was actually Teresa's grandfather's birthday. And because of that, the family was going over to Thomas and Karen's home to celebrate. Teresa was also in attendance at this celebration, and she did leave at one point in the night to go back to her house. However, she did return back at approximately 7 p.m. to finish out the night by watching her and her sister's favorite TV show, which was Extreme Makeover Home Edition. She stayed until approximately 10 o'clock p.m. before ultimately going back to her home. So the following day, October 31st, which was Halloween, Teresa started out this day like any other normal day. The day started out with her receiving some phone calls and making some phone calls for the Auto Trader magazine job that she had. Now, one of the phone calls that Teresa received was from a business called Avery's Auto Salvage. Now, Teresa got a message from them asking if she would be able to go out to the auto salvage yard that day to take a picture of a minivan that the salvage yard was looking to sell. Now, Teresa did return the phone call later that morning at approximately 11 o'clock a.m. and told them that she would be able to go out to Avery's Auto Salvage at about 2 p.m. that day to take pictures of the minivan. Teresa ended up calling them back at approximately 11 o'clock a.m. that morning, telling them that she would be able to go out to Avery's Auto Salvage yard at about 2 p.m., and the appointment was set from then. Now, before we get any further into this case, I really think it's important to take a minute and talk to you about Avery's Auto Salvage. I want to talk about what it is, who ran it, and why it is so pivotal in this case. Avery's Auto Salvage was a family business. It was an auto salvage yard that opened in 1965. It had been in the Avery family, and in 2005, during this case, it had been taken over by siblings Chuck and Earl Avery. Chuck and Earl were the ones who owned the business, and they had two other siblings, Barb and Steven Avery, who worked in the business as well. Barb worked for the reception desk, and Steven worked on taking apart car parts and preparing them for demolition. So Avery's Auto Salvage really was a family business through and through, and it had been in the family for decades. Now, before we get any further in this case, I think now is the best time to really give you a better understanding on who Steven Avery is. Again, that is one of the siblings, a part of Avery's Auto Salvage, because we are going to be talking about him quite a bit in this case and throughout the rest of this episode. So again, it's really important for you to have an understanding and a background on who he is and what led us here. Steven Avery was born on July 9th, 1962 in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, to his parents, Alan and Dolores Avery. According to Dolores, she said that Steven attended an elementary school that focused on students with a learning disability that needed to be taught at a slower rate. By 1985, Steven was said to have an IQ of 70 and that he was quote unquote barely functioning in school. Now, there were really two perceptions of Steven, and this is from people in Manitowoc County. These are the people that knew Steven. There were two perceptions of him. His family knew him to be this happy-go-lucky, harmless kid growing up. He was bubbly, he was outgoing, he was kind, he was nice. But the rest of the community in Manitowoc County knew him to be something very, very different. Stephen was known to be a troublemaker. He was always known to be up to no good, and he was known as one of the bad kids in town. The Avery family, in and of themselves, were definitely the outcasts in Manitowoc County. Most families in this area were known to be middle-class farmers, but the Averys ran a salvage yard, and they really isolated themselves from everyone else in the community. They were on their own. They were in their own little world. They lived on their street called Avery Road. They had their own road dedicated to them, and they never bothered feeling like they had to conform to others in the area. And the Avery family really stuck together. They didn't feel like they needed to be around anyone else. They really were a tight-knit family that had each other's backs, and you're going to see that throughout the rest of this case. Now, Stephen himself has admitted that he had a pretty good childhood. He enjoyed growing up on the salvage yard. It gave him the opportunity to learn about cars. He was taking them apart. He was putting them back together. And Stephen did not go to college. However, in 1982, when he was only 19 years old, he did get married to his first wife, Lori. Lori was a single mother at the time, but the two did go on to have their own children together. So they had a pretty well-blended family. So now I want to talk to you about Stephen's history with the law and his criminal history at that. Only 1 year before getting married to Lori in 1981, Stephen had his first run-in with the law. He got arrested after burglarizing a bar with his friends. They went out to this bar and broke through a window and stole some packages inside of it, as well as $14 in quarters. He ended up serving 10 months in prison for this before being released on probation. Now, his second time in prison was actually for animal cruelty in 1983 when Avery poured gasoline and oil on his family cat and then threw that cat into a bonfire and watched it burn to death. Again, Stephen was charged for animal cruelty and went to jail. However, he was released in August of 1983. Now, Stephen blames both of these offenses on just being young and immature and hanging out with the wrong crowd. But then in January of 1985, Stephen got in trouble a third time. And this time, he got arrested after he drove his cousin Sandra off of the road and pulled a gun out on her because he said that Sandra was spreading false rumors about him masturbating in his front lawn. Stephen said that the rumors were really bothering him, and when he saw Sandra driving down the road one morning, he decided to try and get her to stop. He said that he didn't have any bullets in the gun, he just wanted Sandra to stop talking about the rumors and wanted to scare her. Now, things end up getting a little complicated here because Sandra was actually married to a member of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department at this time, and it is believed by people in Manitowoc County that the Sheriff's Department went after Stephen more harshly because of the fact that Sandra was married to one of the members at the Sheriff's Department. So a lot of the community in Manitowoc County was basically blaming the Sheriff's Department for having a bias against Stephen because of what he did to Sandra. Now, Stephen was charged with this for endangering safety regardless of life and felon in possession of a firearm. He went to jail for this, but then got out once again, but he was arrested 6 months later in July of 1985. Now, this arrest occurred when a woman named Penny was jogging on a beach in Lake Michigan at approximately 3:50 p.m. Now, while she was jogging, Penny said that she noticed a man in a black leather jacket. She ran past him and heard him mumble the words to her, "Nice day for a jog, isn't it?" Now, when it was time for Penny to turn around and run back, Penny realized that the same man in that jacket was standing in her path. Penny said that she tried to get around the man. She tried to run into the water at one point even. However, this man grabbed her and dragged her into the woods. Penny said she tried to fight back. She was kicking and screaming for someone to help her. However, Penny's attempts were overpowered as the man attempted to rape her, beat her, and then left her in the woods. Now, when Penny was given a photo lineup, she did pick out Stephen's mugshot photo out as the man who attacked her. So she identified the man who attacked her as Steven Avery. But there has been many speculations about this mugshot photo and about this photo lineup in general. There was a composite sketch artist who came in and spoke with Penny, and based off of her description of her attacker, he drew up a composite sketch. However, this composite sketch artist, was accused of seeing Steven's mugshot picture prior to drawing this composite sketch and then drawing a picture based off of Steven. So essentially, he was accused of being a part of framing Steven. Some people tried to say that he was trying to draw a picture that looked like Steven Avery. That way, when Penny went to look at the photo lineup, she would think that the composite sketch looked most like Steven. Now, the composite sketch artist adamantly denies any of this. He says that that is not true and that he never even saw Steven's mugshot until after the composite sketch was made. And you might be wondering why people would even think that the sheriff's department would want to frame Steven, but many people believed that because Penny was a stand-up woman in the community, her and her husband were highly, highly respected people. So a lot of people believe that the sheriff's department just wanted to frame Steven so that this case could be over and done with and that it would look better on them. Now, the Manitowoc County City Police, which just to be clear, is different than the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, they claimed that they didn't believe that Steven Avery was responsible for Penny's attack. They said that there was another man who fit the bill a lot more than Steven Avery did, and that was a man named Gregory Allen. Gregory Allen at the time was an escalating offender in the Manitowoc County area who did not have an alibi for the time that Penny was attacked. Gregory Allen was an escalating offender in the Manitowoc County area that police were very well aware of. The city police would actually go in and do checks on Gregory multiple times a day, almost as much as 14 times a day, to make sure that he was doing what he was supposed to be doing and that he wasn't doing anything he wasn't supposed to be doing. However, on the specific day that Penny was attacked, no one from the police force was able to locate Gregory Allen. No one was checking in with him at that particular time. So Gregory Allen didn't have an alibi, but Steven Avery did. His family said that they were with Steven all throughout the day. He was doing different odd jobs around the house. He was pouring concrete in the salvage yard. He was doing drywall with his brothers. At one point, he drove to Green Bay with his family and went to dinner, which they have a receipt for, and then drove home. But regardless of the fact that he did have those alibis, the police still showed up to Steven Avery's home at 11:45 p.m. that night to arrest him. Now, ultimately, this case did go to trial because Steven pled not guilty. Penny testified in the trial saying that she was adamant still, even at that point, that Steven was the one who did this to her. She said that during the attack, she made it a point to take mental images of the person that was attacking her. That way she would be able to hold them accountable and to get justice at the end of her attack. And she was positive that that person was Steven. Now, at the end of the trial, 23-year-old Steven Avery was found guilty of sexual assault, attempted murder, and false imprisonment, and he was sentenced to 32 years in prison at the Green Bay Correctional Institution. Now, Steven's family all believed in his innocence, and a lot of people in Manitowoc County believed in his innocence as well. His family in particular was adamant that Steven was with them the whole entire day of Penny's attack, so there was no way that he would have been able to do this to her. And along with that, the public believed that this was the sheriff's department's way of putting Steven away for good. They believed that the sheriff's department had a vendetta out for Steven from the very beginning due to his arrest 6 months prior when it came to Sandra. So because of that, that is why it's believed that they would want to put Steven away for good. Now, from the very beginning, Steven said that he was not responsible for this. He said that he had done a lot of things wrong in his life. However, he always admitted to everything he did wrong, but he was not going to admit to this. Steven kept getting told that if he admitted to Penny's attack, that he would have a possibility to have probation or have a chance at an earlier release. However, he said that he wasn't going to admit to something that he didn't do. Now, fast forward to 2001, the Wisconsin Innocence Project actually took on Steven's case. They went back through all of the DNA evidence, and what they found was that there were several hairs found on Penny. When she went to the hospital and had a rape kit, that is when those hairs were found, and there were 13 hairs to be exact. 11 of those hairs had no root, so no DNA, but there were 2 hairs left. One of the hairs belonged to Penny herself, so it all came down to that one last remaining hair. The police ran that hair through the DNA system and found that it was not a match to Steven Avery, but they did get a match, and that match was to Gregory Allen. So from the very beginning, the city police were saying Gregory Allen seemed like the more likely offender in this attack. And it turns out that they were right. Now, at this point, Gregory was already back in jail for an unrelated rape charge. But what this meant is that Steven had spent 18 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. On September 11th, 2003, Steven Avery was now a free man. Now, the general takeaways from this case was that clearly there was faulty work done. Either things were not looked at clearly enough, or there was intentional bad police work done because the police and the sheriff's department particularly had a vendetta out against Steven and wanted a reason to put him back in jail. Now, after Steven got out of prison, he went back to living with his family on the auto salvage yard. And even though Steven was very, very relieved to now be a free man, he did want justice. He ended up filing a civil lawsuit case, and that case was against Manitowoc County, the former sheriff, and the former district attorney, and he was seeking $36 million in damages. Now, many people that were involved in this civil case were testifying all in the months leading up to October of 2005, which again was around the time of Teresa's disappearance. She went missing on October 31st, 2005. So now we're going to get back into Teresa's disappearance. I just thought it was important to take a second to give you all of the information and the background on Steven Avery, because again, he's going to be a main person that we talk about throughout the rest of this case. Now, going back to October 31st of 2005, Teresa was scheduled to go to the Avery Auto Salvage Yard on this day, but this would not be the first time that she had been to the Avery Auto Salvage Yard. She had actually been there several times before in the months leading up to October 31st. She had been there 6 times to be exact, and the most recent time she was there was only a few weeks before this, on October 10th of 2005. Now, according to coworkers of Teresa did express that she didn't like going to the Avery salvage yard because she particularly thought that Steven Avery was what she said creepy. She said that he always gave her an unsettling feeling, and on one occasion when she arrived to the salvage yard to take pictures, he answered the door in a towel, and that made her extremely uncomfortable. But nonetheless, she was scheduled to go back that day and agreed to just take a few quick photographs. But little did anyone know that that would be the last time that Teresa would ever be seen. Teresa never made it back home on Halloween night, which was unlike her, and her parents and her family started to get very worried. So the following day, they called police and filed a missing persons report for her on November 1st, and right away, the search began. Over the next couple days, there was a search party for Teresa of over 120 people looking for her or her Toyota vehicle. Now, because the police were able to communicate with Teresa's job, they were able to tell police that Teresa was scheduled to go to the Avery Auto Salvage Yard on October 31st. She had gone to 3 other houses that day in Manitowoc County. However, the Avery's house was the very last stop she had to make, and that was the last time that anyone had seen or heard from her. Now, 5 days after she was last seen, on November 5th, Teresa's car was finally located. Teresa's car was found at Avery Auto Salvage. Now, it was found partially concealed. It was covered in the front with branches and brush, almost as if it was attempted to be hidden. Now, when this happened, the police immediately shut down Avery's Auto Salvage. They closed off the property, and because the Averys lived on the property with the auto salvage company and the same property where their business ran out of, the police shut everything down completely, and the Avery family was not allowed to be anywhere on that property for 8 days while police conducted their search. And then, 3 days after Teresa's car was discovered, on November 8th, Teresa's remains were found. Teresa's body was found near Steven's trailer on the Avery property. Her remains were discovered in a burn pit that had other tires and steel and car parts in it. There were pieces of bone and teeth that were found in this burn pit that cadaver dogs led police to. Police removed the fragments of the bones and the teeth from this burn pit and sent it off to the forensic lab, and it was through there that they were able to confirm that the bones and teeth found in the burn pit were a direct DNA match to Teresa Halbach. Police immediately conducted a press conference where they said at this point they were turning this into a homicide investigation. They also stated in their press conference that throughout searching the home and the Avery property and Steven's trailer, they were able to discover Teresa's car key inside of Steven's bedroom. Now, because of this, Steven was immediately arrested for the murder of Teresa Halbach, and clearly there was a lot of evidence against him. Not only were Teresa's remains found right outside of Steven's trailer in a burn pit, which leads police to believe that Steven tried to get rid and dispose of her remains, but her car key was also found inside of his bedroom. But because of Steven's past history with the sheriff's department, people were pretty divided on where they stood in this case, whether they believed the sheriff and the police department or whether they believed Steven. There were two sides in this. The first one was that Steven was a cold, calculated, evil murderer. That was the first side. And then the other side was that Steven was once again being set up by police. And if you're sitting here wondering why, the why for that was because Steven had an active lawsuit at this time against the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department. They were the same ones that were working on this case, and Steven was suing them for $36 million. Now, this car key was a huge point of contention in this case. And if you are on the side typically of Steven got set up for this murder, a big argument that you probably have heard, or a big argument that you have if you are on that side, is this car key. A lot of people believe that this car key was planted in Steven's bedroom. Now, the Manitowoc County City Police were the ones who initially were conducting the search. However, 3 days later, the Sheriff's Department came in and helped them continue the search of the Avery property. And it was the same day that the Sheriff's Department came in to help search that that car key was found. So again, a lot of people believe that that car key was planted by the Sheriff's Department when they came in to help. Steven's lawyer, a man named Walt Kelly, also came out during this time right after Steven got arrested for Teresa's murder and said that he was not able to get in contact with Steven. Steven had a right to an attorney. However, Walt was not being told where Steven was being held. He was not told if Steven was being interrogated, and he was not able to get any access with Steven whatsoever. But again, the evidence against Steven was very, very strong. But again, the evidence against Steven was incredibly, incredibly strong and incriminating. Not only was the car key found in Steven's bedroom, but Steven's DNA was found on that car key. So it wasn't just the car key was found in the room, his DNA was on that car key. And along with that, inside of Teresa's car, police discovered blood. There was different blood stains all throughout the car, and each one of those blood stains were either Steven's or Teresa's. Now, Steven's preliminary hearing was on December 6th of 2005. A bond was set for Steven for $500,000. Several months later, in February of 2006, Steven settled in his civil suit and was granted $400,000 out of the $36 million that he was initially asking for. Now, this was also something that sparked a lot of conversation because a lot of people thought that $400,000 was nowhere near the amount of money that Steven should have gotten. They believe that for being wrongfully convicted and put in prison for 18 years, he should have gotten more. But many people in Manitowoc County thought that this was purposeful and that he was only granted this much money. That way he wouldn't be able to get a strong legal and strong defense team to help him throughout the Teresa Halbach case. So there are a lot of theories going on here. And again, I'm just trying to give you both sides of the case before moving forward. Steven did end up getting two very prominent lawyers in Wisconsin, and those lawyers were Dean Strang and Jerry Budding. On March 1st of 2006, this case took a whole different direction. Something happened in this case in March of 2006 that changed everything for not only Steven Avery, but for the information as far as what we knew about the Teresa Halbach case. Now, the DA did a press conference where he stated that there was another suspect in custody for the murder of Teresa and that this person confessed to their involvement. Everyone at this point, when they heard this, was absolutely shocked. No one could imagine who else could have been involved in something like this, but they were even more shocked to hear that the person that confessed to being an accomplice was none other than Steven's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Avery. Brendan was the son of Steven's sister. So again, Brendan was Steven's nephew. Now, the following day on March 2nd is when police really got into more detail about what Brendan confessed to. The press conference the day prior was really just to announce that there was another arrest that was made. And then the press conference on the 2nd is when they went into further detail about what exactly it was that Brendan confessed to. According to police, Brendan told them that on October 31st, Brendan came home from school at approximately 3:45 p.m. He lived right next door to Steven Avery on the same property, and when he got home, he got the mail from the mailbox and saw that there was a letter that was for Steven. So he started walking over to Steven's trailer to give him the mail. Now, leading up to the trailer, Brendan said that he started to hear loud screaming that was coming from a woman. He knocked on Steven's door 3 times very loudly before ultimately Steven answered. Brendan said that he was half clothed and full of sweat. He said that Steven brought him back to his bedroom, and that is where Brendan saw Teresa bound to Steven's bed with shackles. Brendan said that Teresa was begging for her life and was asking Brendan to help her. However, Steven instead invited Brendan to sexually assault her. Brendan said that Steven then told him to slit Teresa's throat, which he did. However, she still did not die. Afterwards, he said that him and Steven choked Teresa to death before dragging her body outside into the burn pit. He said that they then shot Teresa twice, once in the stomach and once in the head, before lighting her body on fire and leaving her in the burn pit. So that is the story that Brendan gave police, and that is the story that police repeated out into the public at this press conference. Now, something that I do want to say, and I do think it's important to mention this, was Brendan was only 16 years old at this time, and when he was questioned by police, he was never given a lawyer or a parent present. There was no one there to talk to Brendan. Police actually went to his school and pulled him out of class to interrogate him. They brought him back down to the police station, again, not advising a lawyer or not telling any parent where he was. All in all, Brendan was asked 1,525 questions over the course of 2 interrogation periods, and 98% of those questions were hinting to him that he was guilty or it was content that was relating to the case. Now, it is arguable, and the public has questioned whether or not Brendan fully understood what he was admitting to. A lot of people believe that he was just trying to tell the police what they wanted to hear because he was being coerced into saying something. During the interrogation, Brendan was being told time after time again to just tell the truth. He was being led in certain questions in certain directions, and people believe that he was just trying to say whatever he had to in order to get out of the interrogation. After his confession, Brendan actually asked the authorities when he was going to be able to go back to school because he had a project that needed to be turned in that day, and that statement alone just further strengthened people's belief that he didn't fully understand the gravity of what he was confessing to at the time. But regardless, based off of the statements that Brendan had made, there were additional charges that were placed onto Steven, and those charges were kidnapping, sexual assault, and false imprisonment. But Brendan was also arrested, and he was charged with being a party to a first-degree homicide, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. Now, this was not the only incriminating thing that happened to Steven that day. This was not the only bomb that got dropped in this case. That same day that Brendan had made his confession, detectives found bullet fragments with Teresa's DNA on them inside of Steven Avery's garage. Now, the bullet hadn't been found initially in November of 2005 when police were conducting their search. However, police stated that no one had been or searched in that garage until 4 months later in March of 2006 when the bullet fragments were found. Now, along with that, authorities also found handcuffs and leg shackles in Steven's house, which again could corroborate Brendan's story because he said that he saw Teresa shackled and handcuffed to the bed. Along with that, police also found handcuffs in Brendan's house as well that he lived in with his mom, but his DNA was not found on any of the items. And as far as Steven goes, he said that at the time he had those items because he wanted to use them on his girlfriend Jody, but they had nothing to do with Teresa or the case itself. So now let's talk about this case going to trial, and we're going to talk about Steven's trial specifically. Steven's trial began on February 13th of 2007, and for the prosecution, they claimed that Steven was without a doubt and hands down a cold-blooded killer. They claimed that from the beginning, he had planned on murdering Teresa. The day that Teresa got the call to go out to Avery's auto salvage, Steven had been the one to tell his sister to call Teresa specifically. He said that he wanted the photographer who had been out to the property previously and told his sister to be the one to make that call to the magazine. Now, like I mentioned, Teresa had been out to the property about 6 times prior to this, with the most recent being October 10th, 2005. So the prosecution was really trying to paint this picture that getting Teresa to the auto salvage yard was all a part of Steven's plan. They claimed that it really wasn't even about taking pictures of the minivan to begin with. Now, along with that, they said that Steven was the last known person to see Teresa the day that she went missing. No one saw or spoke to Teresa after she got to the salvage yard that day. There were no phone calls made. She never returned any text messages. After she went to the salvage yard, all communication from Teresa stops. Now, as far as the defense went, the defense tried to claim that Steven once again had been pitted by the police for a crime he did not commit. The defense was really able to use the Penny case and how Steven was wrongfully convicted for that to strengthen their argument here. Again, they stated that because Steven had a $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, that would be the motive for them to put him behind bars for the rest of his life. That way, the sheriff's department would not have to pay that settlement. The defense continued to argue that the sheriff's department planted the evidence to make it look like Steven was the one who killed Teresa, which, just to paint it out bluntly, if Steven was being framed for this, if he was not responsible, what this would have meant was that someone, whoever was responsible, whoever was trying to frame Steven, would have taken Teresa off of the Avery property, murdered her, burned her remains, brought those burnt remains back to Steven's house, dropped them off in his burn pit, placed Steven's blood in Teresa's car, and then placed the key in his room and the bullet fragments in the garage, all without being noticed. Now, as far as testimonies go in Steven's case, Brendan's older brother, Bobby, testified. So again, this would be Steven's nephew. Now, according to Bobby, he said that on October 31st, 2005, he did see Teresa walk towards Steven's trailer at approximately 2:30 p.m. Again, Brendan, Bobby, and their mom lived very close to Steven's trailer, so they were able to see who was coming and who was going. And according to Bobby, he saw Teresa right after 2:30 p.m. Now, Bobby then said that just a few hours later, he noticed that her car was gone, but again, he didn't think anything of it. He thought that she had simply just left. Bobby then went on to say that afterwards, just a few days later on November 3rd, Steven had actually asked Bobby if he wanted to help him get rid of a body. Now, Bobby said that initially he thought that Steven was just joking. He thought that this was a weird comment to make, but again, he thought it was a joke. He wasn't taking it too seriously, so he just said no. Along with that, Sergeant Andrew Colborn and Lieutenant James Lenk from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department also took the stand to testify. Now, the defense really went after them as far as the evidence that they were accused of planting, and they both adamantly denied having planted evidence whatsoever. They said that in pertaining to searching Steven's home, they weren't necessarily being gentle about searching through the house. They were turning over furniture, they were shaking bookshelves, which is ultimately what led to the key of the car falling out. They said it wasn't like the key was sitting there on the floor, and Sergeant Colborn was the one who actually found the key, and he said that he had to shake the bookshelf multiple times to get it to fall out. Now, a gun expert from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab named William Newhouse took the stand, and he says that there was a .22 caliber rifle that was found in Steven's bedroom. Now, according to him, he said that this more than likely would be linked to the bullet that was found in the garage. However, he could not be 100% certain that it was fired from that gun. But he also did say that the bullet could not have been fired from any other gun. After that, a woman named Sherry Culhane, who was the chief of the state crime lab's DNA unit in Madison, Wisconsin, also took the stand to talk about the DNA findings that she discovered after the evidence was combed over. According to her, she said that Teresa's blood DNA was found inside of Teresa's car. She said that Teresa's DNA was also found on the bullet fragments found in the garage. She said as far as Steven's DNA went, there was his DNA in blood found in Teresa's car, as well as precipitation on the car key. So Steven's DNA, his touch DNA, and precipitation was found on the car key, and that precipitation would have come from sweat. Teresa's sister also took the stand and said that Teresa owned a specific pair of jeans. They were a brand called Daisy Fuentes jeans, and the jury learned the day before that that same pair of jeans was found outside of Steven's trailer. So the same pair of jeans that Teresa owned ended up being a pair of jeans that were found right outside of Steven's house. Now, you might be sitting here asking yourself, how did Steven's blood get in that car if the evidence was planted? How is the defense trying to argue that the blood evidence was planted in the car? And to answer that question, the defense explained that Steven had previously given a blood DNA sample back in 1995 for a different trial. So the argument was that the sheriff's department, because they already had a vial of Steven's blood in the courthouse, the sheriff's department would have been able to take that vial and poke a hole in the bottom of it and use it to plant the blood in the car. So they would have taken the vial, poked a hole, and then placed that blood that was inside of the vial in different areas in the car to make it look like Steven's blood was in the car, when in reality, it came from a vial almost 10 years prior. So that was the argument that the defense was trying to make, but the prosecution quickly disproved this argument because according to them, they said that the blood in the courthouse from 1995 would have had a chemical in it, and that chemical is known as EDTA. It's a chemical that's helped use to preserve blood, and the blood that was found in the car did not have that EDTA chemical. It was tested for it, and if it was the same blood that was in the vial, it would have had that chemical. But the blood in the car did not have that chemical, which proved that the blood did not come from the vial. The sheriff's department did not steal it from the courthouse. It was, in fact, fresh blood. Now, Steven did not testify in his trial. He said, quote, "There is no reason for me to testify. Everybody knows I'm innocent." End quote. On March 19th, 2007, Steven Avery was found guilty of first-degree murder of Teresa Halbach, as well as illegal possession of a firearm, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, he was acquitted of the corpse mutilation charge, and the sexual assault and kidnapping charges were actually dropped before the trial ever began, but he still was charged and found guilty of the first-degree murder. Now, as far as Brendan goes, Brendan had a separate trial trial, and it began on April 16th of 2007. Now, during this trial, the prosecution obviously focused on the interrogation as well as the confession. However, the defense argued that this was coercion and this was police just badgering Brendan over and over until they got the story that they wanted. The defense argued that Brendan never had any criminal record prior to this and that there was no physical evidence that proved that Brendan was a part of this crime at all. There was no physical evidence. His DNA was not found anywhere. There was no blood of his found anywhere. None of his DNA is anywhere on the crime scene. There is no physical evidence to link Brendan to Teresa's murder. Now, this trial lasted for 9 days, and on April 25th, 2007, after deliberating for 6 hours, the jury found Brendan guilty of being a party to first-degree homicide, second-degree sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. He maintained his innocence, however, was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole in 2048. Now, both Steven and Brendan have been attempting over the years to appeal their convictions. However, they have been unsuccessful in doing so. In December of 2015, Netflix released a docuseries called Making a Murderer that I'm sure many of you either know or are familiar with. Now, the series focuses on Teresa Halbach as well as Steven Avery and Brendan as well. Now, when you watch the documentary alone of Making a Murderer, it is fair to say that it is very biased towards proving Steven's innocence. It definitely left out some key information in regards to Teresa. It left out the fact that Teresa was uncomfortable being around Steven Avery. It also left out a lot of Steven's criminal background. And if you watch the documentary alone, it is very easy to believe that Steven is completely innocent in all of this. However, I really urge you to do your research. And this just goes for anything. I urge you to do your research regardless of whatever theory you land up on, whether you believe he did it, whether you believe he did not, and you believe he's innocent. I encourage you to do your own research, not only for, again, this case, but really everything in life. Because again, there were things that were left out in this documentary, just plain and simple. There were things that were left out to paint Steven in a better light. Now, several years after this docuseries Making a Murderer was released, there was a sequel to this docuseries, if you will, and it was called Convicting a Murderer. And in this series in particular, this more so focused on the information that was left out from the original docuseries. And instead of painting Steven as innocent, this series definitely paints him more so to be guilty. So you have two sides of the spectrum here, regardless again of where you end up falling. If you have seen the docuseries, if you have not, again, I just encourage you to do your research. I tried to present this case today as unbiased as I could be. I tried to present to you with the most important key facts of this case, and I encourage you to make your own decision and form your own opinion because of it. So with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Halloweek. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah. I am your host of Killer Instinct. If you have not already, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it, but I will see you guys tomorrow for our third episode of Halloweek. So until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.